Welcome to the Conservative Edge. I'm Dr. Joe Curry, your host. This show will give you an edge on the truth. It is about substance on each and every issue. Today we are discussing a very complicated issue, the issue of South Africa. However, when you look at the African situation in general, the picture is not all doomy, but it's not very reassuring. With us is two excellent guests. One is Dr. George Ayite. He's emeritus professor for the American University, and he's the president of the Free African Foundation. And with us also is Dr. Harry Booyens, both of them via Skype, and he's a citizen of South Africa, and he has a doctorate in physics. Gentlemen, welcome to the Conservative Edge. I'm very honored and pleased to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for having me here. Thank you.
My pleasure. When one looks at the African situation, one finds some hopeful signs, but for the most part, it seems that certain countries, I take that as South Africa as well, are regressing. If you look at the data, per capita GDP is pretty good, one of the highest in South Africa, in Africa as a whole. Almost 4 times that of Kenya, twice that of Angola, and almost more than twice that of Nigeria. GDP is about 330 billion. GDP growth rate last quarter was negative, minus 2.2, but it's expected to be positive for 2018. Unemployment is unbelievable, 26.7%. 26.7%. Current account balance is negative 8.6 billion, and the currency is at 12.7 to the dollar. Stock market last year was negative at 5%. So one wonders, with this country with so many resources, by the way, the resources and reserves in gold, platinum, diamond, and palladium are shrinking. However, the potential of South Africa is still enormous, in my opinion. But politics are intruding. And one of the things that concern me a great deal, and that's the subject of our conversation today, is the new law that allows the government to expropriate white property, white-owned property. And I would like you to comment generally about what's happening in South Africa, Dr. Ayite and Dr. Booyens, and then we'll get to the issue of that law and the effects it has had on South Africa.
Well, I suggest Dr. George goes first.
Well, I think the developments as far as land is concerned in South Africa has been very, very disturbing. It seems that South Africa wants to repeat the same mistake that was committed in Zimbabwe when land was expropriated from white commercial farmers without compensation. I mean, forcibly seized. Now, this was in the early 2000s, and this virtually destroyed Zimbabwe's agriculture. Zimbabwe used to be the breadbasket of the region and capable of feeding the whole of Southern Africa. But because of the forcible land seizures by war veterans, literally destroyed Zimbabwe's economy and agriculture. That mistake need not to be repeated in South Africa. Nobody questions the fact that there's been inequitable distribution of land in South Africa, and land was forcibly seized from blacks way back in the 18th and 19th centuries. And that injustice has to be righted. But you don't do that, using force. Otherwise, there'll be a catastrophic destruction of South Africa's economy, just as it happened in Zimbabwe.
Yeah. I agree with you, Dr. George. What is interesting right now in South Africa, the countries that we used to think are troubled countries suddenly are emerging, and they're emerging in big ways. Ghana is up 8.3% this year, its growth rate. Ethiopia, 8.2%. Cote d'Ivoire, 7.2%. But South Africa is regressing. is trying to copy instead the growth model, the free market model, is trying to copy, as you indicated, Zimbabwe. That is not healthy. And the most important thing it is doing right now, South Africa, in a negative way, is trying to export the brain power of the country. There are many whites, highly educated whites, highly sophisticated whites like Dr. Booyens, who just simply decided that South Africa is not going to be in their future. Dr. Booyens, your comments.
Yeah, well, as to the very last point, yes, I left the country in the year 2000 because all of this was quite clearly on the cards. It's just that it's only now that people are really taking note. I guess that's because it's being presented in terms that they can understand. When people talk about expropriation of land without any, being paid anything in return, that'll certainly get any American's attention. But these things have been on the cards since the year 2000. In the first few years when Nelson Mandela were in charge, there was something of a decency about things, and everybody thought, hey, we're going to build a whole new country together. There's going to be a chance for everybody. And everyone I knew really put their heart and soul into everything. The moment Thabo Mbeki took over from him, it was like ice cold water was poured over everyone. His vivid hatred of all matters white just came through immediately. And that only got worse when Jacob Zuma managed to get rid of him and he took over. Zuma reduced South Africa to a little village fiefdom. He basically raided the country. It's only in the last few weeks that some of the latest disasters under his hand have become clear. It was just immense corruption. And now we've got the latest chap, Cyril Ramaphosa, who was actually Mandela's understudy. He was Mandela's pick to follow him. And Ramaphosa, just for the record, is the guy who did the negotiations with the original white government that got them to step down. So he is absolutely no one's idiot. But he apparently made an arrangement with one wing of his ANC party that they would support him if he put this matter of expropriation on the table.
Yeah, but he was initially opposed to it, right, Dr. Booyens?
Everybody kind of thought that Ramaphosa is a level-headed guy, but it looks like he made a deal with the devil in order to get the job, and he's delivering to the devil.
Yeah, when we deliver to the devil in the case of South Africa, we're talking about the ultimate form of corruption. I mean, just think, with all of the things that everybody was raiding the public treasury, it seems. But when you really put the expropriation into the picture, look what happens. So we have a guy what's called the adjudicator. He walks up to a white farmer and he says, you have too big a farm, we're going to take about 1/3 of it, or half of it, or 2/3 of it. And then once they take that land, they'll give him a compensation that is decided upon not by the market, but by that adjudicator. And then they take it and try to sell it or to give it to black farmers or to black businessmen. Is that the way how it works?
Not to my knowledge. To date, there's been a willing buyer, willing seller process. And what they're doing is basically saying, we've had enough of that. White farmers aren't surrendering their land rapidly enough, selling out rapidly enough, so we'll just take it, thank you very much. So nobody knows how that's going to work exactly, except that it sounds like legalized theft.
What I'm saying is that the government could dictate the price at which the property is being confiscated, effectively confiscated. And then they go ahead and they sell it or give it to black farmers. Isn't that a huge room for further corruption? Dr. Ayite.
The ANC government claims that the buyer willing, seller willing model is not working. It's been slow because of inflated land prices. And they don't have enough money to purchase the land to redistribute to blacks. But they also claim that of the land which has been redistributed to blacks, production of about 70% of that land has literally collapsed. And also some of the land transferred to blacks have not been utilized. Almost 90% of them lack, production capacities because the black farmers are not well skilled to farm those land. All those arguments are fine, but I think that one of the fundamental mistakes that they are making, and we should learn from the mistakes of Zimbabwe, is that the land issue should not be solved politically. What I personally favor is that we should give the land issue to a commission, a multiracial, bipartisan commission, so that you remove the emotionalism out of this land issue completely. Because if you try to solve this in the political arena, you're going to have firebrands who are going to take this particular issue and see if they can make political hay out of it. So my recommendation is that you set up a land commission to look at this issue carefully without any, emotional, firepower, attached to it. That's what I would recommend.
But basically, right now, Dr. Buyens, I'm trying to understand your point more clearly. You are saying that the farmer who loses his land, he's being compensated, but not at the fair market price. Is that correct?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. Until today, the situation has been one of willing buyer, willing seller, which means the market determines the price. What the government is now saying, and you're going to have to give me just a little bit of time here to explain.
Go ahead.
What they're saying literally that their new policy is that they're going to, in effect, confiscate that land. Okay? They're going to expropriate it without compensation. The phrase is without compensation. They're very specific about that. It will be without compensation. I need you to understand that.
I fully understand that, but I thought there was a new approach right now, and the new approach was that the government official, right, will show up and they will make an offer on the land that is well below market value as opposed to confiscation. Is that not correct?
If that has happened in the last few days, then you have the advantage of me in terms of news. The last situation I was aware of was the one of Ramaphosa, the president himself, insisting that it is without compensation. He then warned his supporters to not go and just attack white land and grab it. They then appointed a committee headed by Jeremy Cronin, who is a senior Communist Party guy, and he managed to make a very revealing comment that said he think that guys overplayed their hands in Parliament with that vote for expropriation without compensation because, as he put it, that black people would lose their land without compensation. So he was kind of suggesting, gee, guys, the point here was to take white people's land, not to accidentally take black people's land.
So that kind of my point here is this.
Game.
I thought there is a shift right now toward how do we make the situation a little better. In Zimbabwe, I am told even in Zimbabwe, the president right now said effectively that it was unfair to expropriate the property and they're thinking about some kind of a compensation scheme. And I believe South Africa is realizing that confiscation is not appropriate. They have to pay them something. And this is where the something is very much in question, and it depends on the will of the adjudicator who bargains on behalf of the government. Please tell me if I'm right or wrong.
Yeah, Dr. Joe, my comment to you is I have not heard about any of that, and quite frankly, I would believe any of that only if I see Cyril Ramaphosa's face on the screen and I see his mouth speaking those words. I don't want to hear it from anybody else. It's going to be Cyril Ramaphosa staring in a camera and saying it to the world. Otherwise, it carries no weight with me.
Well, I agree with you 100% on principle. I don't think anybody's land should be confiscated. And when property rights are not included in the democratic structure, there is basically no democratic structure.
Then there's nothing. The point why I behave in this fashion is that we now have a situation where somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 white farmers have been murdered on their farms, where certain organizations yell and scream, kill the farmer, kill the farmer, kill the white farmer. What do you expect those people to behave like? So sitting here as a white guy with family on farms, friends on farms, some being attacked, I want to hear this from Cyril's mouth, straight out.
Yeah, well, the departure of the white farmers or the white businessmen in South Africa is alarming. I understand that England and especially Australia are putting some kind of a limitation right now. They used to welcome them with open arms. Now there are so many of them right now that both countries are having second thoughts about receiving so many people from South Africa. But my point here is, clearly the situation is dire. Clearly one cannot stay in South Africa and feel like a full-fledged citizen, and that's why all the whites are leaving. But whether it's expropriation or partial payment for the land, I guess we'll have to wait until a pronouncement by the government. Dr. Ayite, what do you know about this situation here that we are discussing?
Well, the thing is, the economic freedom fighters, they were the ones who started by propagating the Zimbabwe line that expropriation without compensation. And they brought a lot of political pressure to bear on the ANC. You see, the ANC has become very, very unpopular because of the corruption within the ANC. The Zuma, for example. And they have been losing support to the economic freedom fighters. So they are sort of adopted the economic freedom fighters plank of expropriation without compensation. And in February of this year, the National Assembly set up a joint parliamentary constitutional commission to amend the constitution, and it said change clauses such as compensation, expropriation without compensation. And it seems that the ANC has adopted that particular plan, and that is causing a lot of anxiety and worry in South Africa. And that is why you're seeing all these kind of turmoil in South Africa. And I think that this particular decision needs to be reversed. That's why I suggested that the ANC should not be solving this particular problem, and that the land issue should be tackled by a commission.
I see. Dr. Booyens, could you please explain to us how you came to leave South Africa, and were your properties confiscated, and contrast that with the latest departures from South Africa? Those people who left, did they leave because their property was confiscated, or did they sell it at a very reduced price just to get out of South Africa? And give us an idea basically about 2000 when you left South Africa and 2017 where people are leaving right now in droves.
Okay, let me put it to you this way. While Mandela was in charge, there was a general feeling that everybody's trying to make the country work, and a feeling of brotherliness and everything that you picked up in the international media. The moment Thabo Mbeki took over from him, which is even before that appropriate election, it was like ice water was poured over everything, and you knew, if you were a white guy, you knew you had problems. It's without a doubt. By the year 2000, when I left, I certainly sold my property. There was no problem with that. I sold my property, but I sold it at a reduced price, took my pain and losses, and left the country. So that gets us to, I'm sorry, I should say that everybody else I know went through more or less the same at that point. So there was no confiscation of land. But I figured the writing was on the wall. And the reason for that is that in the workplace, we were seeing two distinct phenomena. And I was working in a parastatal kind of organization. There were two phenomena. The first one was uh, the affirmative action thing, along with which came a buried, invisible black union that didn't want to ever reveal itself, but all the black staff belonged to it. And so that was the first thing. And they made it clear to me, into my face, that no, they weren't there just to replace the top management. They wanted to get rid of all guys like me. They said it to my face. Um, and then the second factor was something that was far more terrifying than that. And that is that political commissars, political officers, in true Soviet style, like you see in the movies, were being placed in position. I had to deal with some of those. And I saw very senior executive officers of good reputation and long standing. I saw them having to kowtow to these guys. It was terrible that they couldn't do a thing without the approval of the ANC's in position political commissar. In my own case, my own boss phoned me one morning and told me, Harry, this guy that you folks hired in there a while ago, what's with him? And after a while, I told him, look, the point is he is an AA appointment, came with a good resume, but we can't figure out what he's capable of doing at all. He doesn't seem to be able to string 5 words together in a row in a written report even. So, and he got very upset at that point. I asked him, what's up? And he said, well, I got a message from Winnie Mandela's office this morning to say that from now on I report to her through him. This is the boss of a 5,000-man organization that has to report the next morning to a guy, or through a guy who's completely useless. His only ticket is that he is an ANC political commissar. And this kind of stuff was happening, and folks didn't talk about it because they couldn't believe it. And this is real. I ended up at a presentation to 3 city councils where a government deputy director had to deliver a speech. But because her political commissar wasn't right there by her side, she found me behind a door and begged me to go and give the speech in her place. I had to ad lib and invent a speech because a government deputy director general was too scared to open her mouth without her ANC minder in position.
So we went from the Nelson Mandela age, so to speak, where whites and blacks were getting along, democracy was rather vibrant, to some kind of an autocratic system, basically, that is set up to abuse property rights and to make sure that there are enough incentives for whites to leave the country instead of staying in the country. Is that correct?
Well, they're very blatant about it. I mean, the previous president, Zuma, said in so many words that the country's problem started when the white people arrived in 1652. He's very blunt about that. And the EFF talks day and night about take the land back from the whites who stole it. And, you know, history doesn't bear out a single thing that he says. I can show you who got what land when in history. I've made a point of studying the history in detail. And I've got the facts and the evidence.
Let me ask you 2 general questions, if I may, Dr. Booyens. The first one, can an economy prosper if literally the brain trust or some of the brain trust in the country leaves the country in droves, going to, say, Britain or going to a place like any other place, okay, especially Australia? Do you think that this is destroying the economic base of South Africa?
Of course it is. You can even just take the medical profession. If you go to a province like Saskatchewan in Canada, you know, there's a massive number of South African doctors there. Why are they there? Well, because that government insisted that they serve their internship in very dangerous places. So they packed their bags and they left. Now I get comments from local medical people saying, yeah, the South African doctors we used to get were brilliant. They're not so great anymore, the ones that arrive these days. In other words, the cream of the crop has left. I'm sure that my friends in South Africa will want to shoot me for that comment, but I'm just saying what folks here are telling me. Ordinary, disinterested Canadians are telling me that. I live in Canada.
All right, let me ask you a more general question and a very pointed one, if I may. Are you surprised that American blacks, African Americans in the United States, who have tasted the bitter fruit of slavery, apartheid of U.S. style, are you surprised that they are not coming to the aid of whites in South Africa, basically trying to say to the government of South Africa, what you're doing is wrong, and we should do everything we can to rectify it?
Well, when President Obama got his job, I thought, okay, this is the opportunity where a black American president, the most powerful guy in the world, is finally going to turn around to South Africa and say, stop it. Just stop it. You are doing this in our name and it will not stand. He did nothing of the sorts. He went and appointed Nelson Mandela's ghostwriter into his administration. That was the guy who took the fact that Mandela was a communist, he took it out of the book, out of Mandela's book. That was the moment that I knew that, nah, forget it. There's going to be absolutely nothing. Obama is part of the problem, not part of the solution. So, and many black folks in America looked up at him, and this is what he went and did.
All right. One last point in here. Looking into the future, are you optimistic about the future of South Africa under Ramaphosa?
I think originally Ramaphosa may have had a different plan in mind, but I think he's realized that the only horse in town for him to ride is one that is overtly racist, overtly anti-white, and he must preach the stealing of land, otherwise he's out on his ear. I think that's where he finds himself. Whether he really believes it in his heart, I don't know, which is why I get back to a point I believe I made earlier, that I want the denial of that principle. I want to hear it staring into his eyes on a screen, and I want to see his own lips move.
Very good point. Dr. Ayite, time is up. I would like very much for you to have the last word and comment on what Dr. Dwyer said.
Well, the thing is, this is what the problem is. I mean, when they started out with black economic empowerment, I mean, way back in the 1990s, everybody thought it was a good idea. But guess what? Only the big wigs in the ANC benefited from that. And Ramaphosa is one of those beneficiaries of the black economic empowerment. But I think this whole idea is now being corrupted. I mean, having to have a certain percentage of corporation owned by blacks, again, it was a good idea, but now it's been corrupted and bastardized so that, just about anybody can be on a corporation. Doesn't mean that you are going to increase the efficiency and profitability of that corporation.
Okay. Well, with that, we will have to conclude. I thank you so much for appearing on the show, and I wish we had more time to discuss, but maybe sometimes in the future. This is The Conservative Edge, and thank you for listening.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.